everyone, it's Eugene here and welcome to Click 3D. Today what I'm going to be doing is going through the cloth simulation plugin in CloudCompare. And this is a fantastic plugin when you want to segment the ground points away from anything that's above the ground. And it gives you some flexibility to sort of say how aggressive you want to be on the ground points. And it can also create a mesh from those ground points. So it can be super helpful if you're using programs where you want to do some kind of simulation or something like that, or you need the mesh for the ground plane. Now, this has been in CloudCompare for some time. And I know that some people have been talking about using it for cleaning things that are above a road surface. So, for example, many people that do laser scanning, when they're out on a roadway, what'll happen is cars are going by, people are walking by and things like that. And so you end up with a lot of these artifacts, all this noise, from just the environment and people moving. Well, you can easily separate that with the cloth simulation plugin. And it doesn't sound like it just from the name, but it can be a super useful tool. So what I'm going to do is I have this point cloud on my screen and I'm going to run the cloth simulation filter on this a few times. And we're going to try to change the variables and then see what the cause and effect is of each. So let's get started here. And the first thing is to explain how this works. Okay, so what the algorithm is going to try to do on any point cloud is try to drape a sheet over the point cloud. Okay. Now it doesn't do it in the vertical sense with, like trying to drape a sheet. For example, you see here I got trees and I got like vehicles and stuff like that. It inverts the point cloud. So it actually puts it like this, upside down. Okay. And then it says, hey, there's less stuff sticking up here. Now it has to deal with these things here, like where the vehicles were and these other areas, but it basically drapes a sheet. And based on the sheet that is on this point cloud, it then looks at the distances between the sheet and the points. Okay. Now I say the sheet, but I mean like the cloth. And there are settings for example, if you had a regular sheet, how well the sheet or the cloth conforms to those points. And so you could make the cloth more rigid, or you can make it a lot softer so that it falls into these areas of depressions and things like that. So that's sort of what it's doing. And then what it provides you is a separation of, it basically breaks up the ground points to the points that are above ground. And it can also provide you with a mesh of those ground points. So that's what we're going to do right now. So let me turn this back up here. And what you're going to do here is I'm going to select this parking lot, and you see it's been highlighted here. And I'm going to go right over here. So here it says CSF filter. It's sort of not really like an icon, like with a logo, but it just says CSF filter. So I'm going to click on that. So this is the default settings that have been set when this first comes up. And I'll go through these just to explain what they mean. So first here, there's two tabs. Okay, so there's a general parameter setting and then there's advanced parameter settings. We'll go through both. But let's start with the general parameter settings. So the first one is the scenes. So you can think of the scenes as how rigid the cloth is going to be. So for example, you have steep slope. So steep slope, if you have a lot of sharp hills and things like that, things that are going up and down, you're going to want to select this one here. In the case where you have sort of like rolling hills, then you could choose relief, or you can choose generally flat. Now in the scene that I have here, it's generally flat. It's not looking at things like, hills or these vehicles and stuff like that. The ground is generally flat. So what this is going to relate to is how rigid the cloth is going to be. So when I click flat, I'm going to have a more rigid cloth. It's not going to conform to the little deviations and things like that. If I choose steep slope, then I am going to be inclined to see that cloth or the ground changing a lot more rapidly. So I'm going to stick with flat for now. Now, slope processing is something that you would only use in the event that you would have, for example, a very steep slope in certain areas. You can get some errors with the cloth, and the way that it adheres to the curvature of some of those steep slopes. So this slope processing can help you. I'm not going to use it here because it's not really that helpful. And most of the scenes that I do are just, roadways and things like that. There's nothing really that steep. So, unfortunately here, I'm just going to use this particular one to demonstrate the cloth simulation filter. So that's here. I'm going to choose flat. Let me go to the advanced parameter section here. So when it creates the cloth, it's going to have some kind of a grid on there. Okay. So it's sort of a fairly structured grid of triangles or patches or whatever, or squares. And this is going to be the resolution. Now, the resolution here, this particular point cloud is in metric. It's in meters. So if I have 2, it's always in the units that your point cloud comes into CloudCompare. So for many of you, CloudCompare is confusing because it doesn't have inches or feet or meters or whatever. Whatever you import the point cloud in as, so if it was recorded in meters, that's what you're working with inside of CloudCompare. So where I have 2 meters here, I'm going to change this because 2 meters is very coarse, but I will run through this a few times and I'll change it and you'll see what the cause and effect of changing these variables is. So we'll leave it at 2 for now. Then it says max iterations is 500. So I haven't really had a need to change this. 500 seems to go pretty quick. And here it says, 500 is enough for most scenes. And that's true. I haven't really had a need to change it. You get more benefit from changing the cloth resolution or the classification threshold. Now, the classification threshold has to do with how far from this cloth, once it's created, how far above is it going to take points to fall within the ground plane. So right now it's set at 0.5. That's half a meter. So that's relatively large. So if I were to run it right now, I'm going to get parts of the cars and the tires and stuff like that. So there's no way around that. If I choose 0.5, it's a big number right now. And, maybe people that are doing much larger areas, a few square kilometers or a square mile or something, then maybe that doesn't matter as much and it'll get more of the ground. But in this case, we have a small scene and, I want to make it a little bit more aggressive. So I will change that after. Finally, here it says export cloth mesh. So what this will do if it's checked is it will provide you with the mesh that it used for the segmentation. So you'll actually see it and then you can export it as a DXF or whatever. So for people that are doing, for example, collision reconstruction and stuff like that, and they want a nice mesh of the road surface to use in a program like HVE or PC Crash or Virtual Crash or one of those things, this will provide that for you. And then, you can bring it into another program or there's other things that you can do with it. So let's give this a shot. I'm going to choose these settings right now. So again, I'm on flat. I'm not going to choose slow processing. I don't have anything that's aggressively, sloped here. It's relatively flat. And I'm going to choose the defaults, 2, 500, 0.5, and I'm going to export the cloth mesh. Let me hit OK, and let's see what happens here. This shouldn't take too long. Okay, there we go. We've got something here. Now you can see the mesh here has been created and it's generally flat, right? That's really what we told it. We said, hey, just kind of, keep the ground more or less flat, which on the parking lot here on the roadway surface, it's pretty good. So let me shut off the mesh for a second. And you'll also notice here in the database tree that I've got ground points and off ground points. So it's already separated this for us. So let's shut off the off ground points. Okay. So now we're looking at just the points that are on the ground. And if I sort of rotate this a bit, okay, you'll see that I've got, parts of the vehicle here. I had a bus over here. I've got parts of the bus, just the bottom half here. And so this is okay. There was a sign here and, this one of these little signs. You can see I got part of that or whatever. So this is fairly coarse. Okay. This is not really aggressive or anything like that. And we can do better. Now, let me look at it the other way. Let's look at the off ground points. So you see that I don't have much of the ground plane here. I've got a lot of the vehicles and such. Cool. That looks pretty good. And let's look at the mesh. So this is the mesh that's been created. And if I look at the ground points, you'll see that it extends beyond the ground points, the actual point cloud data. And that's typical. It does this all the time. It tries to go a little bit beyond this and create a patch that's a little bit outside of the range of the points that you have, which is fine. But let's have a look at the mesh here and see if we can turn on the wireframe and to have a look at that. Okay, and I'm going to shut off the ground points. So you'll see here that I've got a bunch of triangles. Sort of, it looks like a very gridded patch, but there's obviously diagonal lines. So it turns these into triangles. But basically, these squares here are going to be on the order of 2 meters. That was the setting that we had before we let this run. So this is kind of what you have, very coarse. Kind of very flat, but we can do better. Okay. So we're going to try this again. I'm going to take this right now. I'm going to delete this one. Actually, no, I'll keep that one. I'll shut it off and I'm going to turn back the original point cloud. So, that's the other thing that's important to note here. It's not a destructive process. So your original point cloud remains there all the time. It just shuts it off and it shows you the new results. So that's nice too. You don't, if you make a mistake or whatever, you can always go back and run this many, many times. You don't lose your original data set. Okay, so we're going to run this again. Let me go back to the cloth simulation plugin. I'm going to keep flat because I think that's okay. And I'm going to go to the advanced parameters here. Now, I'm going to turn this down to, let's turn it down to like 0.5. Max iterations I'm going to leave. And the classification threshold, let's say I go down to like 10 centimeters. So that's going to be like 0.1. And what should I expect here? Oh, I'm going to export the cloth mesh again. It's going to have a finer resolution, about 0.5 meter resolution. And what's going to happen is because the classification threshold is now 0.1, I'm not going to get as much of the vehicles and the stuff that's above the ground. Okay. So the points that are above the ground plane are going to sit lower. I'll see stuff closer to the actual ground plane of the point clouds. So let me hit OK here. Again, this won't take very long. It's great that it takes just seconds here to process. And let's do the same thing again. I'm going to shut off the mesh. Let's look at the ground points first. Okay, so now we're looking at the ground points. Now you'll see that when I look at this, remember here I had a bunch of vehicles and I was getting the bottom halves and stuff. Over here, not bad, right? I'm not seeing as much of the vehicles. So there may be a little bit that I'm seeing, but not a lot. That's pretty good, actually, right? That doesn't look bad at all. I can see the outlines here of some of the vehicles. Okay. Yeah, I've got a little bit, but hey, that's pretty good. Not too bad. Let's look at the off-ground points. So I'm going to shut off the ground. So now you're seeing, if I go to the vehicles, you see, I'm just getting a little bit of the tires that are missing here. Okay. So I might be able to go a little bit more aggressive. I think we'll try this one more time and see what happens. But you can see also that the top of the snow, little peaks here where the snow is piled up and stuff is starting to get cut off too. So if I wanted these, then I have to go back and, increase that value. But, that's not too bad. Let's look at the mesh. So the mesh you'll see is more or less flat where the roadway was. And I'm getting these little bit of bumps over here. Now I could also go back and change it to, instead of flat relief, and then maybe I'll get a little bit more curvature, but this looks okay. Let's look at the wireframe. There we go. Now you'll see that the wireframe here is much more, refined. It's at a higher resolution. Again, this was 10 centimeters, so it looks a little bit better. It's not as coarse, much more finer resolution. Okay, great. Let's try this one more time. I'm going to turn the original point cloud back on. And I'm going to go back to the cloth simulation filter. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to go and do advanced parameters. We're going to really get aggressive here. We're going to tell it that all we want is about let's say, like 5 centimeters now. Okay. So we had like 10. Let's go to 5 centimeters and see what that does for us. And let's take the classification threshold. Well, let's do 5. That's okay. I'm just worried if it's going to be too fine, but it won't be. It'll be fine here. We had 10 centimeters here. What if we only went, 3 or 4 centimeters above the ground surface? Let's see what that does. Okay. So let's go to 3 centimeters. That's fairly aggressive. Maybe you could go down to a few millimeters. In fact, you know what? We're going to go down to 1 centimeter and let's see what happens. And then we're going to export the cloth mesh once more. So let me go okay. And let's see what happens. It's taking a little bit longer. Obviously, we're getting a finer mesh, but again, only a few seconds. Okay, here we go. Now you're noticing here where the trees are and things like that. I had a finer mesh, so it's starting to try to stick to the trees and things like that. So that's probably one of the downsides of doing this. But let's have a look. We're going to shut off the mesh and the off ground points. Let's just look at the ground plane. So that doesn't look too bad in terms of the segmentation of the point cloud. You'll see that I've got, I don't really have a lot of the vehicles that were here, and definitely not a lot here. Let's look at it the other way with the off ground points. Okay, now if you look at the vehicles, right, I'm getting almost all of the tires here. So that's great, right? And I'm starting to pick up a little bit of noise or a little bit of the road surface. If there was snow or something above here, I'm picking that up. Definitely the snow banks, I'm cutting off the vehicles and such. Okay, so you'll see that, it does a much better job of really being aggressive on the road surface. But over here, okay, where the trees are and stuff, well, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. However, we need to look at the mesh. So let's look at what the mesh has done here. Let me shut that off and look at the mesh. Okay. So here is where this finer resolution that we're using is starting to, move upwards here into some areas maybe that we don't like. Now, you could always take this mesh and let me go to the wireframe. Okay. You can see it's really small, really, really small here. So you could take this mesh, export it, and then just delete the parts you don't want. But you would have, a really good adherence to the original point cloud in this particular area. And then these areas outside you could sort of get rid of. Or, if we go back and look at one of the other meshes that we had, like this one, okay, relatively flat. If that's all you needed, great. Right? If we wanted something a little bit more aggressive, and I look at this mesh here, okay, this is the other one that we had. You see that it starts to, go up here. There's like little areas where it's starting to go up into the trees and stuff like that. But, this one would work as well if you just needed a generally flat plane. So that's not bad. Now here's something else we're going to try. I'm going to go back to this setting here, which was, the 10 centimeter one. I shut these off, and I'm going to try this one last time, but except this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from flat to relief. And I want to see if that does something in the areas like where I have these vehicles or the snow, where the snow is piled up and such. So let's give that a go. I'm going to make sure that this is the original point cloud is selected. I'm going to go to the cloth simulation. So I'm going to go to relief now. So remember, relief has to do with how rigid the cloth is going to adhere to the point cloud. So I'm going to go with that. And here I'm going to change this back to what I had before. So 0.1, 500, and I'll stick with 0.1 here. And we're going to export the cloth mesh. So let's give this a go. Now let's see what we get now. Let's see if the relief has made a difference. Yeah, it looks like it has when I look at the mesh here. Again, let's do the same thing. Look at the ground points. Okay, so that looks similar to what we had before. Let me look at the off-ground points, and I should be cutting off some of the tires. Yeah, that's definitely true. Okay, but when I go to the mesh now, you'll see that it's the cloth is softer. Okay, it's able to adhere to these other areas a little bit better, like over here. So that's not too bad. And in comparison, if I shut this one off, maybe I can toggle these off and on. This was the other one that I did. So let me shut this one off and let me turn the other one on. Where am I here? There we go. So that's what we had before. Okay, and let me take the wireframe off for a second here, and this way it may look a bit better. I got to go down to the wireframe. Just give me a second. There we are. Let me get my situated here. Okay, there we go. So if I look at this was with the flat selection, and then if I shut that off, this is the same settings except with relief on. So we have a softer cloth. You'll see that it adheres to the road surface a little bit better. So that is pretty much the cloth simulation filter. If I want to export some of these, so for example, if I want to export this mesh, I just need to highlight it here, and I just got to go up to File, Save, and CloudCompare will tell you the different formats that it's available in. Because it's a mesh, it'll give you PLY, OBJ, DXF. Most of those will be formats that you can export into another program and use. So this is pretty much it. Cloth simulation filter. It's a great tool for separating the ground points from, things that are above the ground. And it gives you a lot of options to play with in case you have, a really, sloped surfaces or curved surfaces. So hope you enjoy that one. We'll see you next time on Click 3D. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.